Welcome everyone to read my works. The author is a novice who strives to depict what is in their heart. This book mainly tells the story of the protagonist Nuannuan's upbringing and love story, including power struggles. The plot may be a bit slow ahead, but it's all just a prelude. Nuannuan, however, refused to accept it and sniffed, "You know how to bully people. If you have the ability, marry me." Liu Changqing replied seriously, "I am willing." Chapter 1. Warm Birth. You are listening at novel-full.audio. In the 15th year of the Zhaoda reign, Luming village in Qinghe town was welcoming a new life, and the genius was gradually coming to an end. The continuous rain only gradually stopped in the morning. Water droplets hang under the eaves, forming small puddles on the hard soil one by one. In the thatched cottage, a woman hurriedly walked out and heard her say in an excited and eager tone, "Congratulations to second brother, Sister Wana has given birth to a daughter." At this moment, the people outside the room turned their gaze to the embrace of the midwifely mama, and saw a slightly wrinkled baby with a reddish complexion in the plain coarse cloth. I saw a tall and burly man strode forward, took the child from Li Mama's hand, and prepared to lift the curtain to enter the delivery room. Aunt Su inside saw the door curtain lifted and quickly walked up to Zhu Shan, saying, "Don't worry, wait until your wife's bed is changed before you come in." She then pulled down the grass curtain. On the wooden bed stained with blood, there was a pale woman who tightly closed her eyes and allowed the people around her to replace the bloody quilt. At this moment, Zhu Shan looked at his daughter who was smashing her hands and mouth. He took out an old money bag embroidered with plum blossoms from his arms, fumbled for a small piece of silver, and handed it to Grandma Wan. Grandma Wan happily accepted and took the child from Zhu Shan's arms into the wooden house. The matchmaker thought to herself, "Actually, it's not easy for Zhu Shan and his family. A few years ago, the eldest brother was disabled and spent all the family's savings to repay the debt. In the end, the eldest brother died. Finally, he sold the house in the town and moved back to the village, but not long after, his mother also died. It's really true that he can give so much money now." So she tidied up Psalm 1 well and put on a clean outfit for her. After about a cup of tea, Wenpa walked out and said some auspicious words before speaking to Zhu Shan, "Hurry up, second brother, I'll go first." Zhu Shan then took a big step forward, lifted the grass curtain, and saw his wife who had worked hard for her. He quickly squatted under the bed, took out a washed white handkerchief, and trembled as he wiped the sweat off her forehead. "Speak softly in her ear, wait for you to slow down a bit, I'll feed you the chicken soup on the stove." Li Wan slowly turned her head to face her husband and said with difficulty, "How did you kill the laying hen?" Her voice was hoarse, but she knew her husband was caring for her. Although she felt a little sorry for the laying hen, she happily married a good husband. But she saw her husband suddenly turn around and walk to the dining table, pick up a clay teapot, and pour water into a teacup. Then he turned and walked towards his wife, using his hand to support her upper body, and slowly brought the teacup closer to her lips. After drinking half a glass of water, he slowly placed his wife on the bed and then turned around to put down the cup. When he returned, he saw his wife's eyes filled with tears. The clumsy man anxiously asked, "What's wrong, is it hurting somewhere?" My wife shook her head and said, "No, don't panic. Go ahead, bring me the chicken soup." Zhu Shan quickly turned around and walked out of the door, stepping on the mud puddle, and walked to the kitchen built by the thatched hut. He scooped out chicken and chicken soup from the large pot, with the other hand protecting the bowl to prevent rainwater from dripping under the eaves. The couple is sweetly feeding. It seems that everyone has forgotten the baby next to them, only to see her move her body, but then fall asleep deeply. Chapter 2. First arrival in Luming village. You are listening at novel-full.audio. 2 more days later, the baby girl in bed suddenly opened her grape-sized eyes and spun around on the beam of the house. Take a look at the thatch on the roof, and then take a look at the cover on the bed. Then he tried to wave his hand, but found that he couldn't move at all. I only heard some strange sounds, but it seemed to be made by myself. At this moment, Yugo was wondering why she suddenly turned into a little baby and still lived in such a dilapidated house. She remembers lying happily on the bed with the electric blanket on, brushing her phone to watch her idol. After thinking about it, I also moved my arm, which was a bit plump like a lotus root. Suddenly feeling unprecedented despair. So only loud cries could be heard inside the house. The woman sleeping on the side was suddenly startled and woke up. She quickly picked up the child on the side, gently patted it in her arms, and seemed to be saying something, but Yugo, who was collapsing, ignored it. Then Songwon sang a nursery rhyme in her daughter's ear. The black sky. After about another stick of incense, the child's crying gradually subsided. It seems that Yugo also slowly accepted that he had traveled and passed through a poor family, but he didn't know when he had traveled. Day by day, Yugo went from resisting breast milk at the beginning to making the sound of smashing and sucking during breastfeeding. Every day, besides sleeping and crying, she drank milk. Occasionally, he would smile at Zhu Shan and Songwon. A happy family. Yesterday, Yugo saw the woman, who gave birth to her own mother, getting out of bed and busy in the room for a while, then running back and forth between the kitchen and the firewood room. Her husband is also nowhere to be seen. I only saw her in the evening, and the beautiful woman sat at the table, preparing a steaming dinner. Suddenly, Yugo felt his gaze becoming even dimmer, realizing that it was his father who had returned. He lowered his bow and placed it on the hook behind the door. His eyes showed a hint of fatigue as he sat down, wolfing down his meal while discussing with his wife about preparing lunch for his father-in-law and mother-in-law who were coming tomorrow. He was also worried that the preparation might not be appropriate enough. Zhu Shan said, "This morning, the mountain didn't expect to only hit a rabbit. On the way down the mountain, they even saw a yellow snake. My wife comforted me and said, 'That's enough. Tomorrow, I'll steam the rabbit and make another bowl of snake soup.' Today, I even asked Uncle Liu to go to the town and bring me half a pound of fat and 1 pound of lean meat. I'll stir-fry another dish of vegetables, which will be enough for us to eat. Don't worry, don't you still have me?" The husband looked up, speechless, and quickly finished his meal. When my wife finished tidying up the dishes, I saw my husband sitting in front of the dressing table. In fact, the husband had already regained consciousness when his wife lifted the door curtain. Standing up, he pressed his wife in front of the bronze mirror and said in a low voice, "Let me comb your hair." The husband used a comb over and over again, following his wife's hair, then picked her up and got into bed. The next day, early in the morning, the man went to the field to cultivate and prepare to plant wheat. While his mother was busy in the kitchen, Yugo was wrapped up on the bed alone, motionless. At noon, Yugo, who was by her mother's side, noticed 2 hunched figures appearing outside the fence. She screamed and thought the child on her back was hungry, so she patted the child's back. But as he listened, a loud voice pierced into his ear, "Let's see if the child is hungry." Chapter 3. Warmth Becoming a Child. You are listening at novelfull.audio. At this moment, the woman stopped her kitchen utensils and looked up to see her parents with graying temples. Busy, I wiped my hands on my clothes and stepped forward to help my mother. Mother snorted, "I asked you to marry Zhou Ping, but you won't marry. Now you work hard alone." Songwon quickly defended her husband and said, "I went down to the fields early this morning to make grain." Her mother's face softened. I took my daughter and walked into the table of the wooden house to chat for a while. The father sat on the side holding his granddaughter. Remove the dark striped bundle from his body and pull out a tambourine, shaking it while talking to tease his granddaughter. At this moment, Yugo opened her big eyes and looked at the swaying tambourine, thinking how childish it was. Who would stare at the tambourine and laugh? However, in the blink of an eye, I realized that my grandfather had only come once and it was difficult to refute his face, so I smiled lightly. At this moment, Grandpa took out a handkerchief and wiped the corner of his granddaughter's mouth, smiling happily and saying, "She is really Grandpa's good granddaughter." Yuko pouted and burst into tears. Feeling regretful in my heart, who could have thought that a smile would make my body uncontrollably drool, which was truly embarrassing. After about a stick of incense, my father came back carrying a hoe. As soon as I entered the door, I saw the old man with his daughter. After affectionately calling out to my father-in-law and mother-in-law, I quickly went to the kitchen to fetch a bucket of water and clean my hands. Sitting awkwardly inside the room. At the dinner table, where I never wanted to be warm and indifferent, I could only hear the occasional sound of chopsticks colliding with plates and bowls. After dinner, the father-in-law asked his son-in-law Zhu Shan, "Have you given your granddaughter a name?" Dad replied, "Not yet. We're waiting for you to come and pick it up, Dad. There's only one nickname now called Nuannuan." My father-in-law pondered for a moment and said, "Let's call her Zhu Nuannuan. I hope she can always be accompanied by warmth and treated gently." So Yugo became Zhu Nuannuan and became a little treasure in the family. Wishing Nuannuan a transformation from a crawling baby to a walking and reciting poet. Song-won often feels proud of such a smart and clever daughter, and when talking to Mrs. Su, she can't help but praise her daughter. Su's sister-in-law also said, "When you grow up, you must be one of the beauties in Qinghe town, and you must be filial to your husband and wife." Her mother was also embarrassed when she was said, "Your soldiers are still apprentices in the town," and Huayu often helps her father with farm work in the fields. At this moment, Zhu Nuannuan, who was standing by, was thinking to herself that she had been to this place for over 3 years. In over 3 years, Nuannuan finally found out that she had not only traveled to a farmhouse, but also to a dynasty she had never heard of before. The emperor of this dynasty, surnamed Huangfu, reigned for 18 years and the country name was Zhaoda. And I am in Luming village in Qinghe town, 18,000 miles away from the imperial palace. She often looked up at the sky and screamed loudly, while her mother Song-won often heard her daughter suddenly scream, "Ah ah ah," at the sky alone. She even went to the town to find Dr. Jia for this, but said that her child had no problems. Only Zhu Nuannuan knew why she collapsed. It turned out that there was really time travel in the world, but why didn't she travel back to her childhood self? She must work hard to study, master the secret of wealth, and enjoy a beautiful life. Why didn't she travel to become a princess or a favored concubine? Although the emperor was a bit old, at least she could still be prosperous. Why wasn't she the legitimate daughter of a big family, with the many favors of her brothers? Why? But 3 years later, Zhu Nuannuan gradually regained consciousness, and could only do this to find ways to save his declining home. Chapter 4. Nuannuan is a good child. You are listening at novel-full.audio. Previously, Zhu Nuannuan once asked her mother Song-won, why would she marry her father? Song-won replied, "At that time, your father wasn't like this, it was all for our mother." She choked up as she picked up her daughter's small hand and held the child in her arms. Your father's family didn't live in this old house before. At that time, they were still studying in my father's private school for 4 or 5 years. I never imagined that in the 12th year of the Zhaoda era, shortly after I married your father, because your father's brother was mining, a cave suddenly collapsed. When he was finally rescued, he was on the brink of death. He stayed in the town's medical clinic for more than 10 days but still couldn't be saved. In the end, the family owed a foreign debt, sold the town's house, and returned to their ancestral home. Nuannuan must take good care of your father. Mother Song-won said calmly, but Zhu Nuannuan felt shocked and knew that she was still alive. Aunt Daoxiu's husband, as well as many men in Qinghe town, died in the collapse, and in the end, the county magistrate only gave 4 taels of silver to the families who were killed. This is what people often say, people are like grass and mustard. I suddenly realized that in order to live a good life, one must first have money and then have power. After all, money can make ghosts grind. After thinking about it, Zhu Nuannuan patted her mother's back, and Song-Wan also kissed her forehead. As time passed day by day, Nuannuan often helped her mother pick the spring bamboo shoots on the mountain and took them to the town to exchange for money. I will also struggle with my small body in the kitchen to hold firewood and add firewood to the stove, and bring a cup of hot water to my father who is working in the field. On Nuannuan's 9th birthday, Song-Wan gave her daughter a small gold bracelet, but it was unknown how many days and nights her mother worked as an embroiderer. Father also caught 2 live rabbits with his own hands and gave them to his daughter. Nuannuan also prepared a surprise for her parents, which was a few wild ginger plants she accidentally discovered while picking flowers on the mountain. Nuannuan wants to rely on these few wild ginger plants to continuously reproduce and sell them in the town. Because ginger is not yet a common seasoning, it can only be enjoyed by a few high-ranking officials and people in the palace. Nuannuan dug a wild ginger plant and asked her mother to put it into the soup when cooking. At the last dinner, Dad and Mom found a hint of spiciness and warmth in the soup. But no one expected that the normally healthy mother would suddenly collapse in the kitchen. Nuannuan quickly ran over to help her mother, but found that her own strength was simply unable to support her mother. So she cried loudly and pinched her mother's people with her hands, wanting her to wake up. After seeing no signs of her mother waking up for a few minutes, she quickly ran to Aunt Sue's house and found Sister Huaiyue, choking up, begging Sister Huaiyue, hiccup go to the town and find Dr. Jia to treat your mother. Begging Sister Huaiyue to go quickly. Huayu quickly said, okay, I'll go right away, she said as she changed into clothes and went out, calling out to Nuannuan, go back quickly and take care of your mother. As soon as the words fell, Nuannuan had already run out of the fated door, running on the ridge of the mountain, and accidentally fell from the weeds on the ridge. My hands and pants were covered in dirt, so I quickly got up and wiped my little face, leaving traces of dirt on my face. After about a cup of tea, I finally saw my father's figure on the mountain and quickly shouted, Dad, Dad, Mom has fainted in the kitchen. You go back and take a look, sobbing. Chapter 5. Warmth disappears, dream of wealth breaks. You are listening at novelfull.audio. After half a burning incense stick, Zhu Shan returned home and saw his wife lying on the ground in the kitchen. Quickly ran forward, helped his wife up, picked her up, and walked quickly into the room. After a while, he saw 2 eager figures and panting voices entering the room at the door. Nuannuan hurriedly went over and grabbed Dr. Jia's hem to walk to her mother's window. Dad quickly took out his mother's wrist from the blanket and rolled up the corner of his clothes. As soon as Dr. Jia sat down, he felt a pulse. Madam's pulse is floating and tight, slow and strong, with sweat on her forehead. It should be due to wind cold, but as for why she fainted, it should be due to overwork and she should rest well. It's not a big deal, I'll prescribe a few pairs of wind cold medicine. She turned to the table, picked up an ink brush, and wrote a few lines of words on rice paper. She then turned around and handed it to Zhu Shan, instructing him, go to the pharmacy in town to take medicine. One of the medicines, ginger, is best to use more than a year-old ginger. She then saw Zhu Shan take out a money bag from his pocket and take out half a broken silver from inside, which was also a few people in the family. A day's income. After seeing off Jia Qing, Zhu Shan looked at Huayu and took out half of the lean meat on the beam from the room, handing it to Huayu. Huayu quickly declined and walked towards the door, saying, no need, it's all for Aunt Zhu. Uncle Zhu usually helps us a lot, how can we accept it? After finishing, she quickly ran outside the fence and ran back home. And Zhu Shan had no choice but to hang the meat on the beam of the house again. Returning to bed, I suddenly realized that my daughter's warmth had disappeared. His face became increasingly heavy, and he glanced at his wife who was still unconscious, then tucked in the corner of his blanket. Turning red and walking out. The sky is getting darker and darker, and Zhu Shan is becoming more and more anxious, but still hasn't found his daughter. In the evening, Zhu Shan lit a torch and walked towards the mountains. After about half a burning incense stick, he saw his daughter's figure. He quickly ran over and grabbed his daughter, shouting loudly, "What did you do? Why did you run so far alone? Do you know that your mother is still lying in bed now? It's really not reassuring." As she spoke, she slapped Nuannuan's buttocks. Nuannuan was momentarily stunned and then shouted loudly, "I'm going to find wild ginger for my mother." As he spoke, he spread out his bright red little hand. Zhu Shan just saw the wild ginger in his daughter's hand and was momentarily stunned. Unexpectedly hearing her daughter's crying, she quickly picked up her daughter sitting on the ground with one hand and said in a hoarse voice, "It's all my dad's fault. I shouldn't have hit you." Yes, Nuannuan didn't expect her father, who usually speaks softly, to suddenly scold her. But Nuannuan regained his composure and said, "It's okay, Dad. Go back and boil medicine for my mother quickly." The father and daughter hurried back home. I found that my mother had already woken up and made dinner. So the family sat down and had a peaceful meal. After dinner, Nuannuan took the initiative to wash the dishes. You know, washing dishes was the thing she used to hate the most because it had oil. I saw Nuannuan skillfully lifting the small stool in the corner of the kitchen, moving it to the stove, scooping a few scoops of water from the nearby water tank and pouring it into the big pot. I picked up the towel made of loofah on the stove and started washing dishes. Zhu Shan picked up his wife's hand inside the house and led her to lie in bed. He gently said to his wife, "Tomorrow morning, I will go to town to take medicine for you and bring warmth to the market. What else do you need?" Li Wan gently shook her head. Holding her husband's hand, she said, "Don't tire yourself out." The husband patted his wife's hand and said, "I'll go boil some water, soak our feet together later, and go to bed early today." After seeing her husband off, Li Wanmu secretly took out a handkerchief from under the pillow and began embroidery. Chapter 6. Qinghe Town Market. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Zhu Shan walked into the kitchen and saw his daughter washing dishes, with mixed emotions in his heart. Quickly approaching, he picked up his daughter from the bench and pushed her warm back to accompany his wife to talk. As soon as the curtain was lifted, I saw my mother hurriedly placing something under the pillow, but she approached without saying anything. Just pick up the large and small foot wash basins in your hand and place them under the bed. He said, "Dad will boil water later, Mom will go to bed early today." After washing his feet, he lay warm in the middle of the bed, thinking about going to the mountain tonight to uproot all the remaining wild ginger, leaving only a young seedling that only sprouted for a short time. It seems that the road to wealth is long and arduous. I silently let out a sigh in my heart. Not long after, I fell asleep. Early the next morning, Zhu Shan woke up his daughter. Helping Nuannuan wash her face, eating some leftover food from last night, she hurriedly picked up her daughter and walked to the front of the village. Seeing Wang Qing pulling a cart, there were several people sitting on it. One of them was Liu Bing, the son of Aunt Su, who was about to go to work at a pharmacy in the town. Zhu Shan took out 5 copper coins and handed them to Wang Qing. Wang Qing said, "All right, it's full, let's go to town now." He then saw Wang Qing waving his short whip and slapping the cow's buttocks, making a pop sound. About an hour later, the villagers also arrived at Qinghe town while chatting. Wang Qing also quickly urged people to get off the car so that he could find a good location to sell the vegetables grown in the fields. Nuannuan looked up at the sky and then at the market, guessing that it was only around midnight. Zhu Shan took his daughter's small hand and went to the pharmacy first, taking out the prescription and handing it to the pharmacy apprentice. After a while, the pharmacist packed the medicine and said in a loud voice, 2 or 2 halves. Nuannuan saw his father slowly take out the small purse from his pocket, take out silver from it, and hand it to the pharmacy apprentice. Then, holding the medicine, he turned around and walked out of the Keats Hall. Nuannuan turned her head to look at the pharmacy, but felt as if her father's waist had bent a little further. Stepping out of the pharmacy, I found that there were more and more people, and the narrow streets began to become congested. Those vendors were shouting one by one, like storytelling while boasting about their goods. Until an old man with tomatoes on sticks passed by, making Nuannuan stop and swallow saliva. Zhu Shan saw his daughter's longing, took out 3 copper coins and handed them to Grandpa Tomatoes on Sticks. Grandpa smiled and bent down to ask Nuannuan, "Child, which string do you want?" Nuannuan raised her hand to point to a string of large and red tomatoes on sticks, and said to her grandfather, "Grandpa, I want that string, can you give it to me?" Grandpa touched Nuannuan's head and smiled, reaching for the string of tomatoes on sticks that the little girl had just pointed to. After handing it to Nuannuan, Nuannuan happily said, "Thank you, Grandpa." He then hopped and led his father's hand towards the crowd. After about a stick of incense, Nuannuan suddenly noticed that the crowd had decreased. Finally, Dad stopped in front of a school gate. Strolling in front of the door with Nuannuan, it seemed a bit nervous. Nuannuan asked, "Does Dad want to take me to school?" Nuannuan doesn't want to go to school. Nuannuan needs to be by her mother and Dad's side. However, she suddenly found her dad holding her hand and walking away. At this moment, an old lady across from her suddenly called out to her father. She approached Nuannuan and realized it was her grandmother. Immediately, he broke free from his father's hand and threw himself at his grandmother. Because Nuannuan knows that every time grandma comes home, she will bring food or clothing to the family. Chapter 7. Encounter. You are listening at novelfull.audio. I only saw my father blushing and teasing his neck, saying, "No, Mom, I'm here to borrow money." Yesterday, Warner fell ill and there were no more chickens at home. I wanted to borrow some money to buy Warner some chickens so that she could lay eggs and make up for it. My mother-in-law said, "It's just this matter. You've been standing at the door for so long, and I thought it was a big deal. Come in quickly and don't keep me warm." As he spoke, he walked into the school with a warm hand and arrived at the backyard. He saw a young and energetic old man with a long goatee beard. "Grandpa, haven't you seen me for a long time?" she shouted warmly and sweetly. Grandpa quickly got up from the lounge chair, intending to pick up his granddaughter when he saw his son-in-law. Dad blushed and didn't speak. Instead, the grandmother next to her was so anxious that she pulled her grandfather to the side and explained the situation. Finally, Grandma entered the room and handed a money bag to Zhu Shan. Nuannuan was in my grandfather's arms, and I naturally saw that it was my mother's craft. Dad quickly thanked him. Grandpa snorted and said, "If you take this money and don't take good care of Nuannuan, how can I deal with you as an old man?" Grandma quickly grabbed Grandpa's arm and dragged him behind her, saying to her son-in-law, "Remember to come back if you don't have enough money." Zhu Shan nodded. Then she picked up her daughter from her father-in-law's arms and said, "Then I'll go back. Warner is still waiting for me at home. I don't trust her to be alone." As soon as this was said, my mother-in-law could not keep her, but she put some dim sum in her granddaughter's arms and let her eat on the way. "Don't be hungry." After leaving the school, Zhu Shan went to the place where he bought chickens, bought 2 hens and 1 goose, and went to the meat shop to cut 1 pound of fat and 2 pounds of pork. He quickly traveled back to the mansion. But they found that everyone was waiting for their father and daughter, and they smiled awkwardly. Then the villagers joked that, "Oh, I'm going to stock up now, right?" Nuannuan couldn't hear these words, so she retorted, "This is what Dad does for his mother to heal her body." That's not it. Now no one spoke anymore. The two of them only returned home at noon. Nuan ran to the house and handed the remaining half of the tomatoes on sticks to her mother. Then she turned and ran away, saying, "I have eaten with my father. Hurry up and eat the rest of my mother. I will help my father get something." When Nuannuan looked up, she could not see her daughter. In the afternoon, Nuannuan ran out alone, and Zhu Shan didn't care about her, knowing that she wouldn't run too far. Nuannuan ran to the mountain alone and picked many white wildflowers halfway up the mountain, and thoughtfully paired them with a few green grass. But on the way down the mountain, I met a little boy who looked a little older than her. But she didn't see him in the village. So, as the warmth of person, Xiaobu took a small step and rubbed against him, intending to pat him, but found that his clothes were a bit, how to say, it was that he hadn't washed them for a long time at first glance. Because the little boy has his back facing Nuannuan, of course he didn't know Nuannuan had so much psychological activity. But since everyone has come, how can we give up? So, Nuannuan stood aside and loudly said, "Hey." This sound scared the little boy to sit on the ground, and then he saw him look up with a fierce gaze at Nuannuan. Then he quickly got up and chased the rabbit with a broken leg. Nuannuan realized that she might have let go of someone else's dinner and quickly bowed down to apologize, saying, I'm sorry, I didn't know you were playing with the rabbit. Let me help you catch it." Chapter 8. Encountering a Little Beggar. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The boy replied, "No need, you get out of here." Nuannuan thought to herself, I really don't appreciate it. She apologized to you and even said, oh my God, I don't have the quality. Those who don't have the quality are unlucky. However, we still have the quality to say that. So he quickly stepped out of his short legs and helped catch the rabbit. Finally, in the valley, Nuannuan caught the rabbit, while the little boy seemed to be tired and collapsed on the side. Nuannuan said, "Hey, don't die. I don't know how to kill rabbits, you have to eat and make your own." Then she handed the rabbit to the little boy. But seeing him wanting to bite the rabbit's neck, he quickly patted his shoulder and said, "Don't eat like this, it's very unhygienic. Eating it will cause stomach pain. You can cook it later before eating." The little boy said, "You're almost starving, why do you think about stomach pain?" As he continued to suck on the blood from the rabbit's body. However, Nuannuan couldn't help but interrupt him and said, "I'll take you to the river, clean up the rabbit, and then when I come back, I'll bring you something to eat, okay?" The little boy raised his head and said, "Why are you helping me? What is your purpose?" Nuannuan replied, "Oh, I don't have any purpose, I just want to help you. I really don't have any other ideas. Otherwise, why did I help you catch the rabbit and haven't taken it yet?" The little boy seemed to believe the warm words and said, "Then go and get back quickly. I'll wait for you by the river. Okay, remember to pick up some firewood. It will be useful to start a fire later," she said with a warm smile. Then he took the little boy down the mountain and walked for a few minutes to the riverbank. He quickly ran away. The speed made the little boy feel like all of this was an illusion. But after shaking her head, she still decided to believe that little girl. After running home, Nuannuan quickly found her father behind the house and shouted loudly, "Dad, I met an injured bird on my way back today. I want to use your old clothes to make a nest for him." Zhu Shan was still wondering what bird needed to build a nest with clothes when he saw that his daughter had already turned around and left, not giving him a chance to speak. With a helpless smile, he continued to make chicken coops and goose houses. Nuannuan walked into the room and saw the mother embroidering flowers on the table. She shook her mother's hand and said, "Mother, quickly bring me a piece of my father's old clothes to make a bird's nest." Father has just agreed. Although Song-Wan still had some doubts, she couldn't resist her daughter's constant, "Mother, mother," calls in her ear. So he got up and walked to the wardrobe, looking for his clothes. But Zhu Nuannuan took advantage of this moment to reach for the dim sum that my grandma gave me today and took 2 pieces. Quietly placed in the pocket of the sleeve. Then she quickly urged her mother and said, "Mother, are you okay? Why haven't you found it yet? What if the bird flies away later?" Song-Wan quickly handed Nuannuan a piece of clothing with a hole. Nuannuan unfolded her clothes and said, "Hey, there's still a hole. Forget it, that's it." Then she ran out. Song-Wan still felt that her daughter was a bit strange, but she was confused, so she sat down again to continue embroidering and accidentally pricked her hand. Then in less than a cup of tea, I ran to the riverbank and saw the little boy who was already on fire and preparing to roast the rabbit. Suddenly, a big smile bloomed, and the little boy took out the pastry from his sleeve, letting him cushion his stomach before sitting down. Chapter 9. See you tomorrow. You are listening at novelfull.audio. After sitting down, he began to ask the little boy, "What's your name? Where are you from? Why haven't I seen you before?" Balabala said a long string. The little boy said, "My name is Sun Xiao, and I should be 10 years old this year during the Chinese New Year. Both of my parents died in the 13th year of the Zhaoda reign. Many adults in our town died from the collapse, and many people starved to death. I walked all the way from Qingyang County to here, and only stayed overnight at the dilapidated temple in the village last night. Today, I was planning to see if I could catch food, but I met you." Nuannuan suddenly said with an "ah" sound, "Ah, your rabbit is going to burn." Sun Xiao then turned his attention to the roasted rabbit and quickly took it off the shelf with his hand, tearing off a rabbit leg with his hand and handing it to Nuannuan. Nuannuan was about to take it, but she was suddenly scalded and quickly withdrew her hand. He quickly said, "Aren't you hot? I didn't expect you to become an iron sand palm at a young age." Sun Xiao smiled and didn't speak. He is used to this kind of day where there is often a meal before and after. Then he blushed and asked, "You've been asking me for so long, haven't you told me your name?" Nuannuan just patted her head and said, "My name is Zhu Nuannuan. Everyone loves me, flowers bloom when they see me, and cars explode when they see me." After finishing, she blushed and said, "Just call me Nuannuan." Although Sun Xiao didn't understand the meaning of the last sentence, when a car sees a tire, it explodes, he still agreed, "Okay." As it was getting late, Nuannuan said, "I need to go back quickly, otherwise my dad should be anxious again." She then turned around and left, suddenly turning around and shouting, "See you at this place tomorrow. Goodbye." Sun Xiao's eyes showed envy, and then he lowered his head to look at the burning flames. Suddenly, he wanted to reach out and get close to it. In a few seconds, he was burned by the flames and withdrew his hand. Then he picked up some water from the river and extinguished the flames. Then he walked towards the direction of the dilapidated temple in the village, holding warm clothes handed to him in his hand. After Nuannuan returned home, her mother joked, "Where have you been mischievous again? You're going to forget about dinner." Nuannuan lowered her head and chuckled, but did not respond to her mother. After dinner, the family lay in bed ready to sleep, while Nuannuan was excited about tomorrow's meeting. I don't know why, there are also children in the village who are about her age, but they always feel like they can't get along, so they play alone. And in the other half of the dilapidated temple. As Sun Xiaojiang walked into the temple, what caught his eye were dilapidated and desolate, fallen oil lamps, burnt candle marks everywhere, Buddha statues covered in dust and spider webs, and rooftops exposed to the sky. Sun Xiao returned to the dry ground where he had settled last night, curled up and without even a thatch, so he rested his wrist and prepared to sleep. I don't know why, but the figure of the little girl always comes to mind, tossing and turning. Then he looked at his head and suddenly realized that there was a big hole missing from the roof above his feet. Moonlight tilted out from there, shining brightly on Sun Xiao's body. He widened his eyes and looked at many twinkling little stars. Suddenly remembering my deceased parents made my eyes turn red. Then he silently promised in his heart, "I will definitely live well, don't worry about me." Tears streamed down his cheeks. Finally falling asleep in longing. Chapter 10. Big Fish Eats Small Fish. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Early in the morning, before dawn, Sun Xiao left the dilapidated temple. First, I picked up some dry firewood nearby, and then carried them to the riverbank. He rolled up his clothes and pants and prepared to go down the river to catch fish. Although spring is approaching, the river water is still cold and piercing, and even the villagers are unwilling to come to fetch water or do laundry. They only fetch water from their own wells. Otherwise, if outsiders are found picking firewood in the field, they will have to spit twice. Sun Shao was shivering in the river as he was frozen, holding onto the fish in the water with his frozen purple hands. I only caught 2 fish in the last half hour, the first one was okay, and the other one was pitifully small. After Sun Shao stepped ashore, he quickly lit a fire, approached the flames, and baked his stiff clothes soaked in the river water. After Nuannuan finished breakfast, she sneaked out and walked to the river, only to find that Sun Shao had already put grilled fish on the shelf. Upon closer inspection, it was discovered that there was still a fishy smell, even though the internal organs were thoroughly treated. Then he spoke up and said, "If I had known you were going to roast fish today, you should have told me yesterday so that I could bring salt over." Sun Xiaolu showed his teeth and smiled, "Don't bother so much. I also caught the fish on the spur of the moment today." As he spoke, he handed the big fish inside to Nuannuan. Nuannuan quickly waved her hand and said, "No need, I came after breakfast. You can eat it yourself. You're still growing up." Sun Shao glanced warmly, then lowered his head and said in a muffled voice, "Oh, okay." Nuannuan noticed that Sun Shao seemed unhappy, so she stood up and picked up the small fish next to her, saying, "Although I have had breakfast before, how about trying your cooking skills?" Then Nuannuan saw her, and Sun Shao looked at her with starry eyes, then lowered his head. "But in the blink of an eye, I am not a little kid. At least I lived to be 20 years old in the first half of my life, and now I am 6 years old. Would I still be shy of being seen by a little kid? It's really ridiculous." After thinking about it, he lifted his head and found that Sun Shao had lowered his head. "Cut it, little brat," he said carelessly. Sun Shao heard Nuannuan talking, but he didn't hear her clearly, so he asked, "Ah, what did you say? I didn't hear you earlier, please say it again." With a warm and awkward expression on her face, she said, "It's nothing. I compliment you on your handsome appearance." Then, with this gaze, I realized that Sun Shao was wearing the clothes she gave him, but obviously stealing adult clothes. So he spoke up and said, "Can you stand up and let me see?" Sun Shao stood up and asked, "What's wrong? Is there anything wrong?" Nuannuan chuckled heartily and said, "I'm sorry, I didn't notice that this garment is so big. How about I go back and find another one for you?" Sun Shao quickly declined. Nuannuan also regained consciousness. It should be caused by this little brat's long-term malnutrition. Then he comforted and said, "Don't worry, my brother will cover you up in the future." Sun Shao said, "You don't need to take care of me, I'm your brother. I'm older than you, so the two of them should have said they want to take care of each other, and that's how they dragged each other until noon." Then, Sun Shao reminded Nuannuan to go back, and Nuannuan reluctantly left, saying to Sun's novel, "See you at the foot of the mountain in the afternoon." Nuannuan returned home and hurriedly finished his meal, shouting in the yard, "I'll be back before dinner." After a cup of tea, Nuannuan ran to the foot of the mountain and saw Sun Shao sitting at the foot.